Turn with me, if you would, to 1 Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel chapter 25, page 459. 459, or 1 Samuel 25 in your own Bible. Let's just share much the same story and lesson that I shared with them on Thursday night. This part of the Bible is about Abigail. Abigail was a beautiful lady with a beautiful name who had a big problem. You know, sometimes beautiful ladies with beautiful names can have big issues, can have big problems, especially if they come from a broken family. I think that's especially true, but the family doesn't have to be broken. I think a preacher by the name of Arthur Moore describes it in his book, maybe better than anything I've ever read. He talks about inviting this young couple over who are new to the church, and he and his young bride were going to try to reach out to these young families, and they invited him over for supper, and they began to play a game called Scrabble. You've all probably played Scrabble. When all of a sudden the husband just went off on his young wife. That's the stupidest play I've ever seen. I've seen morons who play better than you do. Why do you always do this to me? Stop it, the preacher said. His voice kind of breaking. He was young. I've heard enough. All four of us just kind of stared at each other, and suddenly there was a lot of tension. So I just said what I knew to say. Jim, let's go outside and take a walk. Let's get away from this for a while. He said he went outside, he talked to Jim, and Jim and Sarah were just that young couple they were trying to reach. He said, I know Scrabble can be a lot of fun, and as you play it longer, things can get silly. You start inventing weird, strange words, but that's sort of half the fun. What happened? But he said, even though I explained the situation, it wasn't good enough for Jim. Shivering together in the winter cold, I asked him what in the world could have triggered a tantrum like that. He seemed apologetic. I'm under a lot of stress right now. I don't know the area yet, and my boss expects me to do the impossible. The moving company lost some of our things, and our kids don't like their new school. We miss our friends back home. I really didn't mean to say what I said. Good enough. Now I started feeling bad for him, genuinely sorry. I let him back into the house, but as I led him in, I noticed something kind of strange. His wife and him at first barely looked at each other. Neither seemed to want to make the first move. My wife had that what's going on look in her eyes. I didn't really know what was going to happen next. Then, like a switch turning on, Sarah began to talk. His wife, act as if nothing had happened. She asked if they could help with the dishes and ask about the neighborhood we lived in, ask about the children's Bible classes at church. She even made an effort to include Jim in the conversation. Jim, where was that place? What was the name of that lady? You know her name. Jim, could you get the children going while I clean up? We'll have them over sometime to our house, won't we? It was just so odd. She talked to her husband the way a mother kind of talks to a child, a pouting child. Yet Jim did not make the slightest effort to respond with an apology. Barely made the slightest effort, period. But valiantly she hung on, hoping that somehow, someday, Jim would eventually grow up. That day never came. Soon after they moved away, we were saddened but not surprised to hear of their divorce. The news came to us in a Christmas card, which ironically proclaimed peace on earth, goodwill toward men. In a book called Reconciliation. Well, in this part of the Bible, we read about Abigail. And Abigail had a problem, and I just read it to you. She was married to an idiot. She was married to an idiot. That was her problem. Maybe I shouldn't say idiot. But sometimes it just fits, doesn't it? Piece of work. Let me tell you Abigail's story. It all kind of began really with David. In this story, you've got David, who has already been anointed the next king of Israel, but isn't king yet. You have her husband, Nabal. The word Nabal in Hebrew, I understand, sounds very much like the word fool. How ironic is that? Abigail even mentions it later on. And Abigail. But it begins with David, who grows up as a shepherd boy outside Bethlehem, and he's watching the family treasure. Back in those days, you didn't have $1 million. You had 1 million he-goats or 1 million she-goats or 1 million camels. That was their treasure. They didn't have banks. So, David was in charge of his family's treasure. But it was hard work being out in the fields all day and all night, leading those sheep to water and then getting them back to graze land and fighting off the predators. The shepherd would have a hook to bring his sheep back in line, but he would also have what was like a baseball bat, a rod, a shepherd's rod. So when the bear attacked, he would drive the bear off with the baseball bat, or he would drive the lion off with the baseball bat. I've seen bears, I've seen lions. I don't want to get close enough to one of those to drive them off with a baseball bat. I just don't. That's what shepherds did. That's what David did. But now he's been anointed by Samuel, anointed by God to be the next king after Saul, that second king of the united Israel. And Saul doesn't like it very much, especially after he slays Goliath and the people really start chanting David over Saul. So he tries to kill David, chases him all over the countryside. David and his band of followers, numbering about 400 to 600 now, this band of followers, they kind of run for their lives over to the place called Nob, a little village. Saul, he is so crazed that he sends out word, and as a result, many are slaughtered in that little village called Nob. In an effort to get to David, 85 priests were even slain in Nob. Saul also was a piece of work. David then flees to Keilah, another village. They don't want anything to do with him after what happened up in Nob. So he finally makes his way to a wilderness, and there's a group of people living there in Zip, in the area of Carmel, and he kind of settles down there for a while, does David and his hundreds of men. David notices there these shepherds coming out, and he remembers how he used to be a shepherd. He tells his men, his fighting men, take care of these guys. These shepherds worked for a very wealthy man named Nabal and his wife Abigail. He said, take care of these shepherds because that's a hard job, and you make sure nothing gets to those sheep. So they protected Nabal's flocks. And as a result, Nabal became even richer, became filthy rich as a result of David and his men and their generosity. It was also a custom back then, if someone was passing by, to give them something to eat. And so David, after a while, sent word into this filthy rich man named Nabal, who could easily afford it, never miss it. Can you give some food to my men and myself? We're out of supplies. And Nabal, this landowner, whom the Bible describes as surly or difficult, he's ruthless and stubborn and boorish. He refuses. He refuses. The shepherds, they come, they find out about the situation, and they rush back to try to help Nabal understand just how much David and his men have meant to them and how much more wealth he now has as a result of them. David gets news of Nabal's refusal. Nabal had said, who is this David? Jesse's son? There are many people wanting to be the next king. Saul is king and wanted nothing to do with David. David gets the news of Nabal's response, and David says, it's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to Nabal. Now, David probably shouldn't have reacted that way. That's what I love about the Word of God. It gives us these people, warts and all. But that's how he responds. As he responds that way, one of the servants rushes in to talk not to Nabal, but to his wife Abigail. Look at verse 18 and 19 of 1 Samuel 25. Abigail, which the word itself means joy of the Father, Abigail lost no time. We see that there in verse 18. But look at verse 14. One of the servants told Nabal's wife Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day there was a wall around us all the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. And that's what the servant said to Abigail. You got to reason with your husband. In verse 18, Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. In other words, lots of food. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. Doesn't that sound familiar? I will not tell him. I will deal with this, but I will not tell him. So, Abigail was giving, very giving. They had it to give. more than they would ever spend. So she sends some food out to David and his men. Now let's just read the Word of God for a moment, shall we? Let the Lord speak to us through His Word. Look at verse 20. As she came riding on her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending toward her, and she met him, or them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good, but may God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My Lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my Lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now, since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies will be hurled away as the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and he has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant." So Abigail says that to David. Abigail was very giving. She gave up enough to feed for days 400 to 600 men. 400 with him, 200 in another place. Not clear if the food was for all or just for the 400. She was giving. She was truthful. Look at verse 25 again. May my Lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. She took some of the blame. She was truthful. Yes, my husband is a piece of work. But I wasn't paying enough attention either. She was giving. She was truthful. She was wise. Look at verse 29. Look at her wisdom. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life. She knew what Saul was doing, the king, chasing him all over the place, trying to take his life. Even though someone's pursuing you, David, to take your life, the life of my master, you, David, will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. God will take care of you, David. Don't you become like Saul, chasing down people and killing them because you're not pleased with them. Don't you become like Saul. Do you hear the wisdom in what she's saying here? She was giving, she was wise, she was truthful and humble. That was Abigail. This humble lady. Look at verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. That's a sign of humility. Look at verse 31, the last few words of verse 31. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant. Remember me. This woman was giving and truthful and wise and humble. It is amazing. I shared with these young people, it is amazing what can happen when one woman makes the right choices. It's amazing what can happen when one person makes the right choices. This is going to be a bloodbath. This is going to be a war. David repented. That's the first thing that happened. The next king of Israel repents in her presence. Look at verse 32. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. Thank you for helping me not to do this awful thing, just to avenge my own pride." It's amazing what one woman can accomplish when she makes the right choices. David repented. Nabal was taken out. That's part of the story too. Look at verse 36. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. You ever been around a drunk man before? It's a great joy, isn't it? Abigail been around a drunk man a lot of times. This is an amazing lady. Let me start again. Verse 36. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing until daybreak. I'll just wait till he's sober. Then in the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Nabal was beyond salvation. Yes, you can get beyond salvation. You can reach a point of no return. Where God just turns you over to the mind of the reprobate and lets you be damned. You can reach that place. God took him out. His heart became like stone. 10 days later, he was gone. It's amazing what can happen when one woman makes the right choices. David repented. Nabal was taken out, destroyed. Abigail was saved. She was redeemed. Look at verse 39. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head. Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. And she became the wife of the king. She was saved from it all. She was redeemed from it all. Making the right choices. You see, she was a part of a dysfunctional family. Rich, but dysfunctional. Part of a broken situation. But redemption was for her too. Redemption was for her too. I want you to hear that this morning. You make the right choices. It's amazing what God can do. Corrie ten Boom, in The Hiding Place, talks about all of her time in a German concentration camp, only because she was helping the Jews. Near the end of that, of course, she slept on straw beds infested with fleas, for which she gave God thanks because the guards would not come in due to the fleas, so they could speak of the Scriptures without fear of any retribution. The guards would not go in there. So she praised God for the fleas that stung her and bit her all day long. It's the kind of woman she was. She got out by an act of God, I believe, and she believes she got out. She talks about going to a home of some people that were helping her as she got out, and she went into the bedroom, and she said, she looked at the bed, and she said, I wanted to sleep on the floor. That bed can't possibly be for me. But it was. She was so used to hardship. She was so used to sleeping on boards with a little straw. Is that bed for me? Redemption. God's favor, God's blessing, it's for you. It's for all those people in broken homes that go by the thousands every week. We've got to get to them and say to them and to their children especially, the next generation, it's for you too. It's not just for us. It's for you too.